Good morning.
Morning.
Delight to be here. And our topic this morning is coin of the realm, but I always like to check out whether or not the message I'm going to deliver is appropriate to the audience or if we need to adjust or change the message. So I have a couple of qualifying questions I'd like to ask just to see if we're in the right arena with this message. And is there anybody here that's ever had any conflict in any of your relationships? Okay, we got two hands and feedback. Okay, we got the right hands. All right, cool. Has anyone, in order to avoid those conflicts, ever taken the geographic cure? You know where you go to the other side of the country, people will be different, or the other side of the city, or another house, or to another relationship. And the person who picks you up at the airport finishes the sentence that the person that dropped you off started. How do they know what to say to you? What's this about? Or you enter into a new relationship and the first thing you do is you read the riot act. This is what I will not put up with. And then you wonder why 6 months later you're living with it. This is called creatorship. And people love the idea of being a creator when the creation's going well. But when the creation's not going so well, don't they always have somebody to blame? And isn't their name always them? If only they would be different, I wouldn't have to feel this. Have you ever said that to anybody? Yeah. You have a problem. You ever say that to somebody? You really have a problem. I have a question for you. If they're the one with the problem, why are you the one with the pain? You ever think about that? Some people, that doesn't make sense. Obviously, if they're the one with the problem, they'd be the one with the pain. So if you're pointing at them while you've got pain, maybe you've got a problem and you don't know it. Having a problem and not knowing it is called living in denial. Denial is not a river in Egypt. It's a state where you say, I have pain or turmoil, and then you enter into a conversation about somebody else. If only they hadn't, and if only they would, and if only they could, and they should, and And you notice that you don't say a thing about yourself. That is the mechanics of how you live in denial. And our whole culture teaches us to live in denial of what we most need to face and most need to deal with within ourselves. And of course, when you're facing all those people who have problems, you have to make sure to protect yourself. You have to make sure to get angry at the right time. You have to make sure to be able to defend yourself and protect yourself. One of my favorite thoughts from A Course in Miracles is the one that says, in my defenselessness, my power and safety lie. Because the minute you set up a defense, because you're an energetic being, you just set up or brought in some form of attack. We live in an energetic world. We are energetic beings. And because we haven't been taught how this energy system works, everything that we don't want to deal with, if you live in the standard culture, you deny, and by denying, again, how do you deny? You're in pain or turmoil and you talk about them. If you talk about somebody else, you're in denial. And what happens when you move into denial is you have to dissociate from the part of your mind that creates that particular dynamic. And to do that, you have to give up your creatorship. And now, the part of your mind that most needs to change is hidden from you. And you know, remember that old song, wishing and hoping and planning and praying? Guess what? Your dissociated mind isn't going to change. I don't care how much wishing and hoping and planning and praying you do. It's not going to happen. Because once you've locked yourself out of that part of your mind, that part of your mind is no longer yours to change. And it's the part of your mind that will define you, will define your behavior every time the stress is up and the chips are down. And it's the part of the mind that radiates out from you and draws somebody in to bring that experience forward in you one more time. Not in any way, shape, or form to punish you, but instead to give you the opportunity one more time to learn forgiveness. Now, it's interesting, we live in a world that speaks about a man who spoke Aramaic, taught in Aramaic, thought in Aramaic, and he's totally represented by Greek thought. The truth is, if Yeshua the man's name was not Jesus, by the way. You know, a Jewish man was not very acceptable in the Greco-Roman world they were trying to convert. And so they looked and thought about, what kind of a name could we give him that would make him acceptable? And so if you look at the word Jesus, it means hail Zeus, Greek god. So now we live in a world where the ideas and the thoughts of Yeshua come out of Greek thought and Greek philosophy and Greek mouths, and everything gets turned backward. And the main tool that needs to be acquired has been disappeared from our culture. And we have been taught to trade in a counterfeit. The main tool that you need most desperately if you are in some sort of pain or turmoil is the tool of forgiveness. Oh, but Michael, I already did that. I forgave my mother, my father, I don't need that workshop. Why is this happening to me again? I've already forgiven my sister, my brother, my kids, my parents, my neighbors, my boss, my former spouse, my present spouse. I've even forgiven my future spouses. I don't need that forgiveness stuff. Guess what I know, if that's your languaging, that you've forgiven them or you've forgiven yourself, is that to date, you have done zero forgiveness work. None whatsoever. Once you understand forgiveness, you will never forgive anyone ever again. And you will never forgive yourself. But if you're in some form of pain or turmoil, you will understand that you hold a part of your mind in hiding, a part that you're blaming somebody else for. And what you need to do is to drop that blame language and that blame game and that conversation about them, and you need to learn how to go inside and crack open your own dissociated state, and coming back into relationship with that which you have dissociated from, change your own internal content. How many here have ever heard that forgiveness is about removing content from your mind, your body, and your emotions? It's never been found on the planet, because what governs the planet is Greek thought. Yeshua would say, in most churches, that's all Greek to me. It doesn't make sense. Why, if I'm in pain, am I letting you off the hook? How does that change what's going on inside me? How does that change what's happening in my physiology? It doesn't. Now it's interesting, a fellow named Karl Marx said, there's a way to destroy a culture, and the way you destroy a culture is you change the meaning of its words. Why would you destroy a culture if you could change the meaning of its words? Because once you change the meaning of a word, you take away from those people the tool that that word represents. And forgiveness has been disappeared from the planet. And we are taught to trade in a counterfeit. We're taught, well, you know, you come to church and you be loving, but when you get out there in the real world, you have to be able to protect yourself and be tough and hard and all those sorts of things. We've been taught to trade in a counterfeit when what we most need is the real article. A story about a fellow who was on his way to work one morning. God appears in the car and says, "Sir, get ready, you're going." Going? Yeah, this is it. You're out of here. And the guy's kind of shocked, and he kind of went, well, okay, I'm ready. Just let me go home and pack. The guy says, no, you don't understand. This is not a journey you pack for. You're going. This is it. Your life is over. The guy says, look, he says, I have worked so hard all my life for my wealth. If I can't take it with me, I'm not going to go. God kind of, gets into his level of commitment. He says, okay, I'll tell you what. I'll cut you a deal. I will allow you to bring one suitcase of your wealth. Go home, pack one suitcase, bring it with you. I'll let you in with it. I said, okay, cool. Let me see what I take. Stocks, the bonds, we have a stock exchange up there. What's most valuable? And he finally decides he's going to take his gold bullion. He gets out the biggest suitcase he's got, and he fills it to the brim with gold bullion, and off he goes. He gets to the pearly gates, and there's Peter, and Peter says, excuse me, sir, but you can't bring that in here with you. And I said, well, actually, he said, I talked with God, and God said I could bring one suitcase of my wealth. I really worked hard all my life. And Peter said, Matt, I've been doing this job for 2,000 years. Nobody brings in a suitcase. The guy says, honest to God, ask him. Peter goes over and picks up the phone. Dad, I got this guy that said you told him he could bring a suitcase. And God stops him mid-sentence and says, Peter, I let him in. I told him he could bring a suitcase. And Peter's like, oh, God, hangs up the phone. Goes back to the guy. He says, I don't believe it. He said, 2,000 years I've been doing this job. It's never happened before, but he said you could bring him a suitcase, so come on in. And what did you bring? The guy puts down his suitcase and proudly zips open the suitcase. And Peter kind of stands back and he looks at the content of the suitcase and he sort of quizzically looks at the guy. And he looks back at the suitcase. He says, why did you bring pavement? Have you ever suspected that the world has taught you to live within a counterfeit structure? Now, what is the real structure of a human life? Has anybody here ever held a newborn child? If you would, remember, go back to the moment where you held that newborn. I had the privilege of doing it. My first grandchild was born back in December. It was awesome. Go back and hold the newborn. And then loud enough so we can all hear you, shout out your description in a single word of the essence of the newborn. What would that word be?
Love.
Beauty, love, innocence, pure, peace. Now, I've asked this question of tens of thousands of people all over the globe in many different cultures, and 100% of the time, the answer is always some variation on the theme of love. Why? Because everybody knows what human life is. And the specialty of our culture globally is to remove you from the experience of human life. Being removed from the experience of human life is called death. The average person in our culture is dead by the age of 4. If you go to the, there's a passage in the book of Luke, which I'd like to share with you, and I'm going to read it so that I make sure I get it word for word. And the interesting thing about this particular passage, there's a man who asks Yeshua a question. And Yeshua already knows this guy is just playing games in his head. You know, he lives in this intellect that's such an insane thing, it's not funny. And so he knows the man can parrot back the answer. He knows he's got it all figured out in his head. He knows all the words. And so he turns the question back to the man. And the man answers it, and he affirms his answer. And then, if you listen carefully to this passage, you realize that Yeshua tells him that it doesn't answer the question he asked. It answers a different question. So this is Luke 10:25, and it goes like this. And the scribe stood up to test him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Yeshua says to him, what is written in the law? How do you read it? He knows the guy can already parrot it like a parrot can. He answered him, saying, You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Now that's the Greek translation. In Aramaic, what it says is love the Creator and neighbor. And by the way, in Aramaic, neighbor means anybody you think about. Anybody you hold in your mind as your neighbor, not just the guy down the block. It was a 6th century change in the dictionaries that changed the word neighbor to be the guy down the block so they could go make war. So he says, and your neighbor in order to maintain self, not neighbor as self. So what is he saying? What is this saying? It's saying, first order of business is maintain a human life when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor. So this is the answer the man parrots back to him. And Yeshua says to him, you spoke the truth. And then he tells him what question his answer answers. And what does he say? He says, you spoke the truth. Do this and you shall live. Remember the guy asked a question about eternal life. Is Yeshua in essence saying to the man, excuse me, sir, you are already dead. The first order of business is get yourself a life. What is a human life? A human life is the awesome, active presence of love. If you don't have one, you're dead. If at every minute of your life, and I mean 24/7, 365, you're not experiencing that, don't tell me all the stories you've got in your head. Don't tell me all your intellectual pursuits in your studies. Get a life. Get an experience in your physiology of what you are designed for, and you are designed to experience the active presence of love in every cell of your structure, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You're just like that newborn experienced. And the world came in and stole it from them with their hostilities and their fears, and gave them a counterfeit. And the counterfeit came in the form of what I like to call the world myth. And what is the world myth? The world myth goes like this. There's a good guy and there's a bad guy. And the good guy kills the bad guy and is the hero. Now, how many have ever read a book, seen a play, watched a movie, seen a television show that wasn't basically portraying that myth? That's the game of the world, is to take away our human lives and teach us that all we have to do is look for the bad guy, which will always be a projection of something inside of you. Remember in Romans 2 it says, beware you who judge another, for that in which you judge another, you have been practicing. So the world teaches us to be filled with generations of hostility and fear and blame somebody else for it. And then, if you kill that somebody else, you are now the hero. We'll load you up with medals, and the king will take their property. Isn't that an interesting game? If you go back and listen to the man named Yeshua, he demonstrated a different truth. He demonstrated what it was to actually live a human life. He lived as this awesome, active presence of love. You'll remember when they came to attack him, he presenced his human life. Now people say, well, oh, no, wait a minute, Michael, now you don't know that story then about the money changers in the temple. Now there, he took a whip and he was really angry. It's like, you better read the Aramaic before you trust the Greek version. Actually, the word that the Greeks translated as a whip is the word prigla. A prigla is a little broom that you'd sweep chickens out of the house with. It had nothing to do with beating on people. It had nothing to do with rage or anger. Although, in that passage, they did prove that they had cars back then. Do you realize that? It says he drove them out of the temple in a fury. I couldn't resist, excuse me. But it wasn't about an anger process. It was about going in with clarity and power. And what is the temple? It's your own temple. And you're going to have to gather the kind of clarity and power that it takes to go inside yourself and remove every money changer. What is the money changer? That's what the world has brainwashed you with, the counterfeit that has you think that you need hostility and fear to protect yourself, and that's what's going to get you where you want to go. But it's never going to get you where you want to go, because in order to do that, you have to give up your human life. The world is expert. It's been practicing for thousands of years in its sophistry to convince us to give up our human lives and to function out of a counterfeit. Now you look at the ultimate test that the man named Yeshua goes through, and he's proven he's pretty intuitive. He knows what's coming. And he shares with his disciples, the men who've lived with him and worked with him full-time for 3 years, he shares with them that his Father has told him he could lay his life down and pick it back up again. Wow, that's pretty awesome. And then he gets the intuitive hit that his final exam is this weekend. What does he do? He knows that he is not yet prepared for that journey. And so he takes several of his disciples. Now, you get some idea of what this man Yeshua is calling us to. By the fact that there's a group of a dozen men who've worked with him full-time for 3 years. And when the stress is up and the chips are down, all but one of them leave. The one that's called the head cursed him and left, denied him. This is not an easy process this man Yeshua called us to do. This is not a Sunday morning game to play. This is not a proclamation about how somebody else is going to do your work for you. You want a human life, you got to claim it for yourself. Nobody else can do that process for you. So Yeshua says to these disciples, guys, I'm going to face my final exam this weekend. I need support. Would you come to the Garden of Gethsemane with me? He takes the disciples there, and he goes into the garden. He says, Father, can this cup pass from me? In other words, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. Well, obviously, he gets the message that he is ready. And he taps into his support team's energy. And what's happened? They're gone. He goes out and he says to them, can't you stay awake for an hour? They've gone blotto unconscious. They've fallen out of the state of holding the high watch, of holding the space of love, into their own internal dynamics, which is what virtually everybody does when the stress is up and the chips are down. So Yeshua goes back into the garden. Now, one of the things that I'm trained in, a system of medicine I'm trained in, is naturopathic medicine. And in the naturopathic system of things, we treat this body-mind unit as an energy system. And we know that if something goes into the system that doesn't belong in it, that sooner or later it's got to be removed from the system in order for health to be restored. And so the symptoms of healing are identical to the symptoms of disease. It's just which way the energy's going. So what are we told Yeshua goes through? He goes through a great deal of internal pain and suffering. Or maybe not suffering, maybe just pain. And we're then told that he sweat blood. Now, from a naturopathic point of view, if someone were to go into an emergency session and carte blanche remove everything that didn't belong, it would probably look like sweating blood. That would symptomatically be what it looks like. That's a logical explanation for what happened to him. And then he comes out of the garden, fully connected to his human life. Now, we've got the perfect setup. We've got the good guy, Yeshua. We've got the bad guy, the high priest servant. We've got the guy with the sword who wants to be the hero. Now remember, when they're going to the garden, Peter says to Yeshua, how many swords should we bring? And Yeshua says, just bring one. Now, remember, the disciples live in the world myth, and they think there's going to be a physical battle. And can you imagine how excited these guys are when they imagine Yeshua with this single sword wiping out the whole Roman army, killing the bad guys? But that's not Yeshua's story. That's the counterfeit story. So Yeshua comes out of the garden. Here comes the high priest who's going to have him shred to pieces, and Peter steps in with the sword and goes for his head. Now, fortunately, he just gets an ear. I can imagine that Yeshua might have given him a look at that moment. It's like, Pete, that's not what we're here for. And then you notice the message he delivered to Peter. If we could but hear this message, our world would change in an instant. What does he say? Peter, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. In other words, if you engage in some form of attack, the world's counterfeit, then that attack is what will ultimately kill you, literally, physically. Now you'll notice that we are the only nation in the world that's ever dropped the atomic bomb on a population that was trying to surrender at the time. We would not accept that surrender. And we dropped that bomb on 2 cities. You'll notice what we're terrified about, what most people are terrified about today. Somebody's going to show up with that device and set it off here in America. And guess what's encoded in the energy field of the earth and humanity? by engaging in that form of attack. That's what's encoded in the system. Somebody better get big enough and learn how to remove what's encoded, or that's what's coming down the pipe. What type of attack have you engaged in? If you have, then what you need to do is go in and remove that dissociated message from your own internal state. And as you remove it, you have forgiven, and you are freed from that which never belonged. Now, what does Yeshua do? He tells Peter, this is not about attack, this is about human life, and the man is going to shred his body to bits. He steps forward as a human being, as the active presence of love, and he heals the high priest's servant. Now, I've had people who said, well, you know, Michael, I hear that, but did you notice that doing that got him dead? Yeah, I noticed doing that got him dead. Have you noticed they couldn't keep him that way? That's what he came to teach us. He came to teach us the power of trading in the coin of the realm of God. The power of living an actual human life no matter what anybody does. Not living in love when you're in a nice, cozy environment like church. Not living in love when you're behind closed doors with safe family members. But actually standing as the space of love 24/7, 365, especially when the stress is up and the chips are down. And if you can't do that, guess what you need? You need the tool of forgiveness. You need to learn how to go inside yourself and remove the generational insanity that has taken over your human life and be restored to this awesome, active presence of love that you are. I'm going to invite you to just quietly close your eyes and take a deep breath. And we're going to go into a brief experience of the process of forgiveness. As we do that, I'm not going to get into an explanation of the forgiveness process. We'll leave that for the workshop this afternoon. I'm just going to ask you to trust me and try it out. If it doesn't work for you, throw it away after the meditation's over. But what I'm going to invite you to do is just to get quiet, take a couple of deep breaths, and go inside. And as you go into that internal state, notice where there's any tension in your physiology or any form of pain. That pain is warning you that there's something in the tissue structure that doesn't belong there. Take a deep breath and let that pain soften and let it go. And I'm going to ask you to think about a situation in your life that's going on right now that involves some form of upset or disturbance that your mind has been pointing at another person. And breathe. As you think about that other person, there's something that you've been wanting from them. There is a goal that you hold that they're not achieving for you. Without a lot of explanation, I'll just tell you that that goal is the key way into healing the dissociated part of your own mind. And so identify specifically and precisely what it is you want from them. Now, be aware that the hostility and fear-based mind is expert at focusing on what it doesn't want. So imagine we've got a child that's being verbally abusive. And what the average mind would say, well, what I want from my child is for them to stop being verbally abusive. I have a spouse that isn't being cooperative. I want them to stop being uncooperative. Perhaps that goal is toward yourself. I want to stop this bad habit, whatever it is. Now, what we want to do is shift out of what we call, and we'll identify this afternoon as the non-being mind, into being. What does your being want from this object of attention? With the child, it's, I want my child to speak to me lovingly, gently, respectfully. With the spouse, it's, I want this spouse to be cooperative and loving with me. With myself, it's, I want to live in the habit of being loved rather than in this old hostility. So identify specifically and exactly the goal you hold in this situation you're thinking about. In the Aramaic language, the word forgive, the word that's been translated as forgive, is shebag, but it literally translates to cancel. And it has to do with opening the dissociated part of the mind by canceling the goal that holds that part of the mind hidden. Now, without a lot of explanation, we'll go into that in the workshop this afternoon, but without a lot of explanation, I'm just going to invite you, whatever the goal is, if it's for the child to speak to you lovingly, gently, and respectfully, cancel the goal for the child to speak to you lovingly, gently, respectfully. If it's a goal for myself to be loving, I cancel the need to be loving with others. If the goal is for my spouse to be cooperative, I cancel my need for my spouse to be cooperative. So as you cancel that goal and just let it go, take a breath, deep breath, let it move all the way throughout your physiology. And Yeshua taught 2,000 years ago about a power that resided in us. In Aramaic, it was called Ruka de Kudsha. It's a feminine elemental force that undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. We might say, in our modern language, the superprocessor. The part in us that can go all the way down to and change the energies right down to our genetic toes. Now that's been called the higher power in some circles, the Holy Spirit in other circles. In Aramaic, it's a literal feminine elemental force that when invited into activity undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. Invite that force to go to work in you right now around this issue that you're dealing with. I invite, and use whatever name you choose, Ruka de Kudsha, I believe there's a vibratory influence to it, to undo this pain, this turmoil, this stress that I'm under. As I breathe, and I invite the active presence of love into me. I ask to be restored to my essential nature, which is love, and to restore that presence of love in my physiology. And breathe deeply. The truth is, your essential nature is this awesome, active presence of love. I join with you in living in that presence 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, whatever's happening in your world. A powerful way of reinforcing that is to look for that presence in everyone that you meet. And so I'm going to invite you to just gently open your eyes and stand up. And there's a song entitled Namaskar, really easy tune to sing, that we're going to invite you to sing to the people around you in the room. And we're going to listen to the melody line of it played once. The words will be up on the screen, and we'll join in singing it to each other. I salute the divinity in you.